The ranch was wide and stretched across hills and valleys that seemed to go on forever. The sun rose slowly and painted the fields with golden light. The man who owned the ranch looked out from the porch of the big wooden house he had spent many years building the land into something that people admired. He had money and land, but he felt a quiet emptiness in his heart. He walked slowly among the animals, noticing the horses grazing, the cows moving together as if they knew their place. He loved the land and the work, but he wanted something more. He wanted someone to share the long days and the quiet nights with him. He wanted a companion, someone who could live with him in the big house and walk with him across the fields. He had tried to meet women from nearby towns, but nothing had worked. He was busy with the ranch, and people had said he was too proud or too serious. He did not care much for parties or gatherings. He liked the simplicity of the land and the animals, but he felt the loneliness most in the evenings when the sky turned pink and the wind moved through the trees. He began to think about a way to find someone who would come to him not by chance but by choice or by arrangement. He thought about a marriage broker, someone who could find a bride for him from a place far away where people might see his wealth as a chance for a better life. He contacted the broker through letters and messages that traveled slowly from town to town. The broker spoke of a girl who lived in a village far beyond the hills. She was young and pretty, and her family was struggling. She had never seen a big house or a ranch like his, but she was known for being polite and hardworking. He thought that this might be the answer. He imagined her walking into the house and smiling at him. He imagined the quiet evenings they could have together, sitting by the fire, talking about simple things. He wanted someone who could fit into his life without changing it much. The girl's family was nervous at first, but the promise of money to help with their land and debts convinced them to agree. They spoke to the girl and told her she could leave with a family who would take care of her. She felt nervous and unsure. She had never been away from her home. She had never seen a place like the ranch. She had only heard stories of wide lands and big animals. She knew she had to obey her parents, but her heart was heavy with fear. She packed her few belongings and said goodbye to her village. She did not know what awaited her, but she hoped it would be a life better than the one she was leaving. The journey to the ranch was long and tiring. She rode in a small carriage that rocked her from side to side. The trees passed by slowly, and the air smelled different. She felt the wind on her face and held her hands together. She thought about the house she would live in, the people she would meet, and the man she would marry. She did not know if he would be kind or strict. She did not know if she would be able to adjust. She only hoped she could do what was expected and survive the change. When she arrived, the ranch was bigger than she had imagined. The house stood tall, with wide windows and a porch that stretched across the front. She saw the fields stretching far and the animals moving freely. She felt small and unsure. She stepped down from the carriage and looked at the man who came to greet her. He was taller than she imagined, and strong. His clothes were neat and his face serious. He offered a hand to help her, and she took it carefully. She did not know what to say or do. She felt nervous and afraid. First days were difficult. She did not know how to move in the big house. She did not know what chores she was expected to do. She felt the staff watching her every move, and she worried about making mistakes. The man tried to make her comfortable. He showed her the rooms, the kitchen, and the stables. He spoke politely, but there was a distance. In his eyes, she wanted to please him, but she felt unsure of how to do it. She missed her family and the small, familiar spaces of her village. The man noticed her quietness and began to feel surprised. He expected someone who would smile and thank him for the chance to live in the big house. He expected gratitude and admiration, but she seemed shy and reserved. He could see her fear, and it made him uneasy. He did not know how to speak to her without sounding harsh. He wanted things to be simple, but they were not. He realized that having money and land was not enough to create connection. He had to find patience and understanding that he had not needed before. The days passed slowly, and each morning felt the same. She would wake early and help with the animals. She would try to clean and cook, but everything felt strange. The smells and sounds of the ranch were new. She missed her old life, and sometimes she cried quietly at night. The man tried to speak to her, but she did not know the words to say. He began to watch her closely. He saw her strength in carrying water and feeding animals. He saw the careful way she moved in the house. He felt a mix of admiration and frustration because she did not respond as he imagined one afternoon. He decided to take her to the fields. He wanted to show her the work that made the ranch successful. He hoped she would understand and maybe feel proud of the life she was entering. They walked slowly through the pastures. He pointed out the horses and the cows. He spoke of the work that needed to be done. She listened quietly and nodded, but he noticed her eyes wandering to the distant hills. She seemed to be dreaming of somewhere else. He realized that she had her own thoughts and feelings that did not always include him. He felt a strange shock in his heart. He thought he was ready for this marriage, but he had not expected that she would be so independent in her mind. Sun went down, and they walked back to the house. The sky turned orange and the wind blew gently across the land. The man felt tired but also thoughtful. He realized that having a bride was not like buying an object. He had to learn to understand her. She had to learn to live with him and the land. They were both strangers in this new life, and they needed time to adjust. He felt a strange mix of hope and worry. He did not know if the future would be easy or hard, but he knew that the first step was already taken. They had met and begun their journey together. First night in the house was quiet. They sat separately in the living room. She tried to read a small book she had brought. He looked at the fire and thought about the choices he had made. He wondered if he could be patient enough to give her the time she needed. He wondered if she could find comfort in the strange new life. He realized that neither of them was prepared for everything that lay ahead, but they had begun a connection that could grow slowly or break quickly. They both felt the weight of the decision and the new life stretching before them. The mornings on the ranch were quiet but full of movement. The sun rose slowly over the hills, and the wind carried the smell of grass and earth. The girl woke early as she had been taught. She moved carefully in the big house, learning the sounds and spaces. She felt the floor under her feet and listened to the birds singing in the trees. She felt small in the wide, empty rooms. But she tried to breathe and keep calm. She wanted to do well, but she did not know what would be expected of her. The man walked through the stables, checking the animals. He noticed her watching him from the porch. She seemed hesitant to approach, but curious. He wanted to speak to her more and understand her feelings, but he did not know how to begin. She had not spoken much since she arrived, and he felt a strange mix of impatience and concern. He knew he had imagined things differently. He had thought she would smile and thank him and talk easily, but she seemed unsure of everything. He decided to take a small step forward and invited her to help feed the horses. She moved slowly at first, touching the animals carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she fed them. She had never been so close. 2 horses before, and she felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. She noticed how gentle they were and how the man spoke to them. He spoke softly and moved carefully as if he understood them. She tried to follow his example and felt a small pride. As one of the horses nuzzled her hand, she looked at him quickly and saw that he was watching her. She wondered if he noticed the effort she was making. She wanted him to be pleased, but she did not know the words to say. The days passed slowly, and she began to learn small things. She learned how to cook simple meals and how to sweep the floors. She learned where the water was and how to carry it to the animals. She learned the routine of the ranch and tried to fit in. She noticed that the man seemed distant sometimes and close at other times. He would watch her silently and sometimes speak, softly asking about her health or if she was hungry. She noticed that he cared in his own way, but she was still afraid of making a mistake. One afternoon he asked her to walk with him to a small creek near the hills. He wanted to show her the land and share a part of his life. She hesitated but followed. He noticed the nervousness in her steps and tried to speak gently. He told her about the past, the work they had done, the storms they had survived, and the animals they had saved. She listened quietly and felt a strange warmth in her chest. She realized that he was proud of the land and proud of what he had built. She also realized that he wanted someone to understand him, not just live in the house. She thought about her own life and wondered if she could find a place in this world that was so different from her village. Animals moved freely around them, and the sun reflected on the water of the creek. She watched the fish swim and felt the cool breeze on her face. She noticed how different it was from the quiet village where she had grown up. The man spoke of the seasons and the rains and how the work changed every month. She asked questions, and he answered patiently. She began to feel that she could understand more than she had imagined. She began to feel that maybe she could live here if she tried, and if he understood her efforts, she felt a small hope that had not been there before. The evenings were still, and the house felt large and empty. She would sit by the window looking at the hills and the animals moving in the distance. She thought about her family and the village she had left. She thought about the man and how he seemed different from what she had imagined. She wondered if he was lonely, like she felt a strange connection forming. But she was afraid to trust it. She wanted to be careful and observe him. She wanted to understand the rhythms of his life and the rhythms of the ranch. She wanted to find a place for herself in the big house. The man noticed small changes in her. He noticed how she smiled slightly when a horse nuzzled her or when a small bird landed nearby. He noticed how she asked questions about the land and the animals. He felt a small relief that she was trying to adjust. He realized that the journey would not be simple, but he began to feel that perhaps it could be rewarding. He realized that he had been shocked at first because she did not fit into his imagined life perfectly. She had her own thoughts and ways of being, and that was something he had not expected. They began to talk slowly as the days passed. They talked about simple things, about the work, about the animals, about the weather. They did not speak about the past or the future, but about the present. They shared small moments that allowed them to understand each other a little more. They laughed quietly when something funny happened. They shared food and chores, and slowly the distance between them began to shrink. She began to feel less afraid of the man and the house. He began to feel less frustrated at her quietness and more curious about her mind and thoughts. One morning, a storm approached and the sky turned dark. She helped the man secure the animals and close the gates. She moved quickly and efficiently, and he noticed her strength. She realized that she could handle the work in the land in her own way. He realized that she had courage and intelligence that he had not seen before. They worked side by side without speaking much, but with understanding in every movement. When the storm passed, they both felt a quiet satisfaction that came from shared work and effort. The nights became easier. She began to sleep better, and the house felt less lonely. She began to imagine a life where she could belong here. She began to feel that the man might not be so frightening after all. He began to feel that she was more than he had expected. She began to see that he was more than just a wealthy man. He had a heart that cared for the land and for the people who worked there. She began to think that maybe they could find a way to live together with respect and understanding. The man began to notice small habits of hers. She noticed how he liked the quiet evenings. She noticed how he moved among the animals with care. She realized that he expected effort and honesty. She realized that he wanted someone who could think and act for herself. She realized that the relationship would not be easy, but it could be meaningful. She began to feel a strange comfort in the big house. She began to feel that maybe she could find a home here, not just a place to live. The days continued with work and learning. She learned to cook the meals he liked. She learned to care for the animals and the land. She learned to speak slowly and carefully. When she wanted to express her thoughts, she learned that patience was as important as strength. She learned that understanding him was more important than pleasing him. He began to learn that she had her own mind. He began to learn that respect was better than control. They were both learning slowly and carefully. One afternoon, he asked her to ride with him on a horse. She hesitated but climbed on. The wind blew through her hair as they moved across the fields. She felt free in a way she had never felt before. She felt the land and the animals and the movement and the sun. She realized that she could be part of this world. She realized that she could find joy even in work. She realized that the man was not perfect, but he could be kind. She realized that they could find a balance between her past and his present. The sun set. They returned to the house. They walked slowly across the fields. She looked at the hills and the animals and the wide sky. He looked at her and felt a strange peace. He realized that the first shock of her arrival had passed. He realized that patience and understanding were beginning to build a new connection. They did not speak much, but they understood each other more than they had before. They felt the quiet bond of shared life and work. The mornings on the ranch became routine, but still full of new challenges. The girl woke early and moved carefully through the big house. She checked the animals, fed them, and cleaned their stalls. She remembered the lessons of the past days and tried to improve. she was learning quickly. But there were still moments when she felt unsure of herself. She noticed the man watching her quietly from the porch or the stables. Sometimes he spoke softly and gave advice. Sometimes he left her alone to figure things out. She appreciated both ways and tried to balance her efforts with her own thoughts. Man began to notice the small ways she adapted. She noticed how he walked among the animals and spoke to them. She noticed how he planned the work of the day and cared for the land. She realized that he expected effort and respect, but also understood mistakes. She realized that patience was important and that the relationship required more than words. She began to feel that she could trust him in small ways and that he could trust her in return. One morning, they walked to the far fields where the grass was taller and the wind moved freely. They talked about the weather and the seasons and the work that needed to be done. She asked questions about the animals and the land. He answered patiently and showed her the best ways to care for the horses and cows. She began to see the land not just as a place to live, but as a living thing that required attention and care. He began to see her not just as a guest or a worker, but as someone who could understand and appreciate the land and its demands. Days were long and filled with work, but they began to share small moments that felt personal. They shared meals and talked about small things from their pasts. She spoke of the village she had left and the life she had known. He spoke of his childhood and the years he had spent building the ranch. They did not speak of the future or expectations, but of the present and the effort they shared. She began to feel a strange sense of belonging, and he began to feel a strange sense of pride in her strength and determination. Despite the progress, there were moments of tension. She struggled to adapt to certain chores or the rhythm of the ranch. She made mistakes or failed to meet the expectations he had. She felt embarrassed and frustrated. He felt surprised and sometimes disappointed. He realized that his vision of the perfect wife did not match the reality. She realized that his pride and standards could be hard to meet. They both realized that patience and understanding were necessary if they wanted to continue together. After noon, a storm approached suddenly, and they had to work quickly to secure the animals and the house. They moved together through the rain and wind, helping the horses into the stables and tying the cows safely. She felt the cold water on her skin and the wind in her hair. She felt the fear of failing and the need to do well. He felt the urgency and the responsibility. For both the land and her safety, they worked without words, but with understanding, each movement and action showing trust and effort. After the storm, they sat by the fire in the big house. She warmed her hands, and he poured hot tea for both of them. They were quiet, but comfortable. She felt a strange closeness that had not been there before. He felt a strange respect for her courage and resilience. They began to see that the shock of her arrival had changed into a slow-building understanding. They realized that they could face challenges together, and that their connection was not just about work or expectation, but about effort and respect. The following days brought small victories and lessons. She learned to manage the chores more efficiently. She learned to anticipate the needs of the animals and the land. She learned to communicate with him more clearly, and he learned to communicate with her more patiently. They both began to feel a sense of teamwork and cooperation. She began to see herself as part of the ranch, and he began to see her as someone who belonged not by arrangement but by choice. They began to notice each other in new ways. She noticed his careful attention to the animals and the land, his quiet strength and dedication. She noticed how he moved through the fields and stables with ease and care. He noticed her determination and intelligence, her ability to adapt and her courage in facing challenges. He began to feel that the life they were building together could be meaningful, and she began to feel that she could grow into the place she had entered so suddenly. One evening, they walked to the hills and watched the sun set. She felt the beauty of the land and the peace in the moment. He felt the same. He realized that the quiet moments were as important as the work. They talked softly about small things they liked about the land and the animals. They shared laughter over minor mistakes. They shared respect over the successes of the day. They began to see that the ranch was not just land and animals, but a place where connection could grow. She began to notice her own feelings changing. She felt less fear and more curiosity. She felt more strength and confidence. She began to imagine a future where she could live and work with pride. She began to see him not just as a man who bought a bride, but as someone who could be a companion. She began to feel hope and determination. He began to notice her courage and thoughtfulness. He began to feel that the shock of her arrival had turned into an opportunity to build something real together. The animals moved freely, and the wind carried the smell of grass and earth. She felt connected to the land and the rhythm of life. She realized that she could adapt and find her place. He realized that he had underestimated her, and that patience was more important than control. They began to find balance in their actions and thoughts. They began to build a slow understanding that neither had expected. They realized that connection was not immediate, but required effort and trust. Days continued with small lessons and shared work. She learned to rise early and move with purpose. She learned to communicate clearly and act with confidence. She learned that mistakes were part of the process. He learned to appreciate her efforts and her perspective. He learned that respect and patience could build trust. He learned that she had strengths he had not expected. They both began to feel that the life they were building together was stronger than either had imagined. One morning they walked to the creek and watched the water flow. She felt calm and thoughtful. He felt the same. She began to speak more about her feelings and thoughts. She began to ask questions about the land and the animals. He began to answer with more detail and care. They began to see that understanding each other required effort and attention. They began to realize that connection was more than presence. It was shared effort and trust. The mornings became calmer and filled with understanding. She woke early as usual and moved quietly through the big house. She tended to the animals and the land with more confidence than before. She remembered the lessons of the past weeks and felt stronger. She noticed small things, the way the light fell on the fields, the way the wind moved through the trees. She felt part of the land in a way she had never imagined. The man watched her from the porch and felt a strange sense of peace. He noticed her growing confidence and the careful way she moved. He noticed how she smiled when the horses came close, or when the birds sang in the morning. He realized that patience and understanding had begun to create a connection between them. He had expected obedience and gratitude, but he was learning to appreciate her effort and independence. One afternoon, he asked her to walk to the far side of the ranch. He wanted to show her a part of the land she had not yet seen. She agreed, and they moved slowly together. The sun was warm and the breeze soft. She felt the ground under her feet and the smell of the grass. He pointed out the different plants, the small hills and the streams that ran across the fields. She listened carefully and asked questions. She began to see the land not just as a place of work, but as a living thing that required care and attention. They spent the day checking the fences and helping the animals. He showed her how to repair the wooden rails, how to move the cows carefully, and how to keep the horses calm. She followed his instructions and added her own observations. She noticed that he listened to her ideas and sometimes agreed. She felt a quiet pride in being helpful, and he felt a quiet admiration for her intelligence and courage. They worked together without speaking much, but understood each other through action. As the days passed, they shared more small moments of connection. She learned to prepare meals he liked, and he began to appreciate her choices. She learned to clean the house and organize the chores in ways that made the work easier. He learned to watch her closely and notice her efforts. He realized that understanding her required more than instruction. It required attention and patience. She realized that understanding him required careful observation, and thought they both began to feel that their relationship was changing from expectation to respect and cooperation. Evening, they walked to the hills and watched the sun set over the fields. The sky was painted with colors that seemed impossible. She felt the beauty of the moment and the calm of the land. He felt the same. They spoke quietly about the animals, the land, and the small successes of the day. They laughed softly about mistakes they had made. They shared thoughts about the work and the rhythm of the ranch. She began to feel that she could live here, not just in body but in heart. He began to feel that he could share his life with someone who respected the land and his effort. The stormy days that came afterward tested them. They had to secure the animals and the house. She moved with determination and skill. He moved with trust in her ability. They worked together through the wind and rain. She felt the fear of the storm and the pride in completing the tasks. He felt the urgency and the satisfaction of shared work. When the storm passed, they both felt a quiet bond that grew from effort and shared challenge. They realized that their connection was stronger because of the work they had done together. The nights became comfortable. She learned to sleep more easily, and the house felt less empty. She began to imagine a life here where she could belong. She began to see him not just as a man who bought a bride, but as a partner in a shared life. He began to notice her growing confidence and her thoughtfulness. He began to feel a respect that went beyond ownership. They began to see each other as equals in effort and understanding. They realized that the past shocks and fears were giving way to a new foundation. They spent time in the garden planting and caring for small crops. She learned which plants thrived in the soil and which needed special attention. He learned to listen to her observations and incorporate her knowledge. They began to see that the ranch was not just land and animals, but a place of growth for both of them. She realized that she could make a home here, and he realized that he could share it meaningfully. They felt a quiet satisfaction in learning from each other and working together. One morning, they walked to the creek that ran through the ranch. The water was clear and moved gently over the rocks. She watched it flow and felt calm. He watched her and felt the same. They began to speak more openly about their thoughts and feelings. She shared memories from her village, and he shared memories from his youth. They listened carefully and respected each other's experiences. They began to see that understanding required listening and patience. They began to feel that connection was growing beyond work and routine. The animals responded to their care, and the land flourished under their attention. She noticed how he moved among the animals and learned to respect their needs. He noticed how she cared and learned to appreciate her dedication. They began to feel a rhythm together that had been missing before. They began to see each other as partners, not in name, but in effort and thought. They began to understand that life together required both work and attention to each other's needs. The days continued. With shared work and quiet observation, she learned to anticipate the needs of the land and the animals. He learned to notice her contributions and respect her ideas. They began to see each other not just in presence, but in action. They began to trust each other slowly and carefully. She began to feel comfortable in the big house and the wide fields. He began to feel that the life they were building together had meaning. They realized that connection was not immediate, but grew from shared effort and understanding. They spent evenings by the fire talking quietly about small things. She learned to speak more freely, and he learned to listen more carefully. They shared stories from their past and thoughts about the land. They laughed softly at mistakes and shared quiet moments of pride. They began to feel that the ranch was not just land and animals, but a place where life and connection could grow. They began to see that trust and patience were as important as work and strength. One afternoon they walked to the hills and watched the sun sink behind the distant fields. She felt peace and hope. He felt the same. They began to understand that life together required effort, understanding, and respect. They began to see that the past shocks and fears were changing into trust and admiration. They began to feel that connection was no longer about ownership or expectation, but about mutual understanding and shared effort. They began to feel that the ranch could be a home not just in space, but in heart. The mornings on the ranch felt different now. She woke early with a quiet confidence. She moved through the big house with purpose and ease. She fed the animals and checked the fences. She felt the rhythm of the land and the animals, and she knew how to work with them. She felt part of the place in a way that had been impossible when she first arrived. The man watched her from the porch and felt a mix of admiration and surprise. He noticed the calm strength in her movements and the careful attention she gave to every task. He realized that the shock of her arrival had grown into something meaningful. He realized that patience and understanding had built a connection that neither of them had expected. He felt a quiet pride in her and in the life they were building together. One afternoon, a messenger arrived from her village. He brought letters and news of her family. She read them quietly and felt a mix of joy and worry. She was happy to hear from her family, but she feared what their expectations might be. She wondered if she should write back and what she should say. The man noticed her concern and offered a quiet presence. He did not speak much, but he was there beside her. She felt comfort in his calm and steady presence. That Evening, they walked to the hills and watched the sunset. The sky glowed with colors that seemed to reflect their thoughts. She spoke carefully about the letters and the news from home. He listened without interrupting and offered gentle observations. She began to see that he could be patient and understanding, even in difficult moments. He began to see that she could be brave and thoughtful, even when far from the familiar. They shared quiet moments of understanding that deepened their bond. Following days brought small challenges. She received more letters and thought carefully about her responses. She balanced her duty to her family with her growing life on the ranch. She worked alongside the man in the fields and with the animals. She spoke about small dreams and hopes. He listened and offered guidance without controlling. Her confidence grew, and he noticed it. He realized that the shock of her arrival had changed into a partnership, built on respect and understanding. One afternoon, a surprise visitor came to the ranch. It was a distant relative of the girl who had traveled to see her. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He felt a mix of curiosity and concern. They welcomed the visitor and showed the ranch and the animals. She spoke with ease and confidence about the work and the land. He realized that she had grown into her new life in a way he had not imagined. The visitor noticed her courage and independence and praised her efforts. She felt proud and he felt admiration. The days passed with shared work and growing trust. They tended to the animals, repaired fences, and cared for the land together. They shared small moments of conversation and quiet observation. She learned to anticipate his needs, and he learned to respect her choices. They began to feel a rhythm together that was deeper than before. They realized that life on the ranch was not just work, but connection and shared responsibility. One evening, the girl asked to walk to the creek. She wanted to be near the water and the animals. They walked slowly together. She spoke about her past, and he listened carefully. He shared thoughts about the land and the future. She began to feel that he could be a companion and not just a master. He began to feel that she could be a partner and not just a guest. They began to see that their relationship had grown beyond the expectations of the past. Animals moved freely around them, and the wind carried the smell of grass and earth. She felt connected to the land and to the man beside her. He felt connected to her and to the life they were building. They began to understand that connection required attention and care. They began to see each other as equals in effort and thought. They realized that trust and respect were the foundation of their life together. A small emergency tested their bond. One of the animals became sick, and they had to work quickly to help it. She moved with determination and skill. He worked beside her without hesitation. They coordinated their efforts and saved the animal. She felt relief and pride. He felt admiration and gratitude. They realized that their partnership could withstand challenges and that trust had grown stronger through shared experience. The nights became calm and filled with quiet understanding. She slept peacefully in the big house, feeling safe and respected. He felt a quiet satisfaction seeing her confidence and courage. They shared small conversations by the fire, talking about the animals, the land, and their experiences. They laughed softly at mistakes and shared pride in accomplishments. They began to see that the ranch was not just land and animals, but a place where trust, connection, and growth could flourish. One morning, they walked across the fields to see the sunrise. She felt the beauty of the land and the calm of the morning. He felt the same. They shared thoughts about the work and the rhythms of the ranch. She spoke carefully about her dreams and hopes. He listened with attention and care. They realized that the life they were building was stronger than either had imagined. They felt that connection had grown beyond expectation into something meaningful and lasting. The weeks passed with shared work and small lessons. They tended to the animals, repaired fences, and cared for the land together. They shared meals and quiet moments of conversation. She learned to anticipate needs and make choices. He learned to respect her decisions and appreciate her efforts. They began to see each other not just in presence, but in action. They began to trust and understand each other deeply. One afternoon, they walked to the hills and watched the sun sink behind the distant fields. She felt peace and hope. He felt the same. They began to understand that life together required effort, understanding, and respect. They realized that the past shocks and fears had given way to trust and admiration. They felt that their connection was no longer about ownership or expectation, but about mutual understanding and shared effort. They felt that the ranch could be a home not just in space but in heart. They spent time caring for the animals and the garden she learned to plant and tend the crops he learned to. Notice her observations and incorporate her knowledge. They realized that the ranch was not just land and animals, but a place of growth for both of them. She felt she could make a home here, and he felt he could share it meaningfully. They felt a quiet satisfaction in learning from each other and working together. The final days of this part of their journey brought small triumphs and quiet reflection. She had grown in confidence and strength. He had grown in patience and understanding. They shared moments by the fire, watching the animals resting in the fields. They spoke quietly about their hopes and thoughts. They realized that life on the ranch had changed them both. They realized that the shock of the past had given way to connection and respect. They felt ready to face the future together with trust and courage. The mornings on the ranch were calm and quiet. She woke early and moved through the big house with ease. She fed the animals and checked the fences. She felt the rhythm of the land and the animals, and she knew how to work with them. She felt part of the place in a way that had been impossible when she first arrived. The man watched her from the porch and felt admiration and surprise. He noticed the calm strength in her movements and the careful attention she gave to every task. He realized that patience and understanding had built a connection that neither of them had expected. He felt a quiet pride in her and in the life they were building together. Morning, she asked to go to the far fields alone. He watched her leave and felt a mix of concern and trust. She moved carefully across the fields. Noticing the animals and the plants, she felt the wind on her face and the sun on her back. She realized that she had learned so much in the time she had been on the ranch. She felt stronger and more confident than ever before. She walked to the creek and watched the water flow. She felt the calm of the moment and thought about the life she was building. She realized that the man had become more than just someone who brought her here. He had become a companion in the work. In the land, she felt gratitude and a quiet hope that they could continue to grow together. The man walked across the fields to check on the animals. He noticed her near the creek and moved quietly so as not to disturb her. She looked up and smiled. Slightly, he returned the smile and joined her by the water. They stood quietly together, watching the fish swim and the birds move across the sky. They did not speak, but the silence was comfortable. They felt a shared understanding that went beyond words. The days passed with work and learning. She continued to care for the animals and the land. She repaired fences and helped with the crops. She learned to anticipate the needs of the ranch and the animals. He noticed her growing confidence and skill. He began to feel that their partnership was stronger than ever. He realized that the life they were building required effort and patience, but also trust and respect. One afternoon, a visitor came from a nearby town. They needed supplies and asked to speak with the man. She helped him organize the goods and answer questions. She moved with confidence and skill. He watched her and felt pride in her independence and intelligence. The visitor noticed her ability and praised her. He realized that she had grown into the life on the ranch in a way he had not expected. She felt proud and he felt admiration. The evenings were calm and filled with quiet conversation. They sat by the fire and shared thoughts about the animals, the land, and the work they had done. She spoke about her past and the village she had left. He listened carefully and offered gentle observations. She began to feel that he could be trusted and that he respected her thoughts. He began to feel that she could be trusted and that she valued his guidance. They realized that trust and understanding were the foundation of their growing connection. The seasons began to change, and the work on the ranch shifted. She learned how to prepare for the winter and care for the animals in cold weather. He showed her how to store food and keep the land ready for the changing months. They worked together efficiently and understood each other without needing many words. She felt capable and strong. He felt confident in her abilities and in their partnership. One morning they walked to the hills and watched the sunrise. She felt the beauty of the moment and the peace of the land. He felt the same. They shared quiet words about their work and the life they were building. They laughed softly at small mistakes and shared pride in their accomplishments. She began to feel that she truly belonged on the ranch. He began to feel that their life together had meaning beyond the expectations of the past. The animals responded to their care and the land flourished. She noticed the small changes in the plants and the health of the animals. He noticed her careful attention and dedication. They began to see that the ranch was not just land and animals, but a place of growth for both of them. They felt a quiet satisfaction in learning from each other and working together one afternoon. A small problem arose. One of the fences had been damaged, and the animals were near the edge. She moved quickly to repair it. He joined her, and together they fixed the problem. They coordinated their actions and completed the work efficiently. She felt relief and pride. He felt admiration and gratitude. They realized that their partnership could overcome challenges, and that trust had grown stronger through shared effort. The nights became peaceful. She slept comfortably, and the house felt warm and welcoming. She began to feel that this life on the ranch was her home. He felt a quiet satisfaction, seeing her confidence. Encouraged, they shared small conversations by the fire. Talking about the land, the animals, and their experiences, they laughed softly at minor mistakes and shared. Pride in their accomplishments, they began to feel that the ranch was not just land and animals, but a place where trust, connection, and growth could flourish. The days continued with work and quiet learning. She learned more about the animals, the plants, and the rhythm of the land. He learned to respect her choices and appreciate her observations. They began to see each other not just in presence but in action. They began to trust and understand each other deeply. She felt comfortable in the big house and the wide fields. He felt that the life they were building together had meaning. They realized that connection was not immediate, but grew from shared effort and understanding. They spent time tending the garden and caring for the animals. She learned to plant and maintain the crops. He learned to notice her observations and include her knowledge. They realized that the ranch was not just land and animals, but a place of growth and learning for both of them. She felt she could make a home here, and he felt he could share it meaningfully. They felt a quiet satisfaction in learning from each other and working together. The final days of this part brought reflection and quiet contentment. She had grown in strength and confidence. He had grown in patience and understanding. They shared moments by the fire watching the animals resting in the fields. They spoke softly about their hopes and thoughts. They realized that the ranch and the work had changed them both. They realized that the shock and fear of the past had given way to trust and connection. They felt ready to face the future together with courage and understanding.